You know, the kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where the local diner serves coffee in mugs stamped with your name, and everyone will lend a hand to a neighbor in need. A place where generations of families grew up together. Well, that is the sort of place where I live. Sure, it is a bit rustic. I mean, heck, I barely even have reliable internet. But it is nice enough for us. It's the kind of place where time feels like it's standing still. Except for one thing. The nights. The nights here are a little different. I have lived here all my life, and there's no place that I would rather be. Or at least, that's what I used to think. This place has its quirks, like any small town. But there's a big one that stands out for us. You see, every night, without fail, at 11:38 p.m., the town locks down. I'm not talking about just closing up shops and less people being out and about. I'm talking about a real lockdown. Doors slam shut and are barred. Windows rattle and lock. And everybody knows that they have to be inside and stay inside, at least for the next part. The next part is strange. No one ever sees anything moving out there directly, but we all just know. We just know that somehow something outside is trying to get inside. An eerie silence falls over the streets. It's like the whole town is holding its breath. And then in 12 minutes exactly, it's just over. I've always wondered why it happens at exactly 11:38 p.m. People here don't talk about it much, but when they do, they whisper. They say it's just the way that things are, that it's been happening for as long as anyone can remember. But I know better. I've seen it. Whatever it is. I remember the first time I experienced the lurking threat to our town. I was still pretty young, only 10 or 11 years old at the time. I had been exploring the forest near the outskirts of town with my friends. The sun had been high in the sky when we first set out on our adventure into the nearby woods. My friends Sarah and Pete, who I had known since childhood, were by my side as we navigated through the dense foliage. Our families had always been close, and that bond extended to us as well, making the three of us inseparable. The forest was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and pine. We laughed and joked as we explored every nook and cranny of this familiar yet mysterious place. The woods on the outskirts of town always felt a little bit spooky to us, and we often only traveled there when we were all together. I remember vividly the sense of fear but also adventure as we had wandered. The trees towered above like sentinels guarding us against our worst fears of what lay beyond. The sunlight filtered in through the dense canopy in spears of gold, casting long, ominous shadows on the forest floor. Sarah, Pete, and I had wandered deeper than we had ever had before, our curiosity piqued by the whispers of hidden streams and forgotten trails. We had never been this far before, and we were having so much fun that we lost track of time completely. As the sun started to lower, we finally noticed how long it had been. It was already after 6 p.m. All three of us knew the rules about being inside before dark, but especially before nighttime, and the even more perilous window of time later. As the sun dipped even further, the forest grew darker, and the air thickened with an unsettling energy. The trees seemed to loom over us, their branches creaking ominously in the fading light. Sarah, ever the voice of reason, suggested that we head back, her tone steady but laced with a hint of urgency. "It's getting late," she said, looking suddenly concerned. "We should find our way back before it gets too dark." Pete and I exchanged a glance, but the thrill of adventure still pulsed through us. "Come on, just a bit further," I urged, though my voice wavered slightly. Sarah hesitated, her hazel eyes reflecting a growing unease. As we pressed on, the forest floor became a tapestry of shadows, each step crunching on leaves that seemed to whisper warnings. The sounds of the forest shifted, the bird song replaced by an eerie silence. And then a rustle in the bushes ahead stopped us in our tracks. "What was that?" Pete whispered, his breath catching. Sarah's hand instinctively went to her pocket, her eyes scanning the undergrowth. "Oh, probably just a rabbit," she said, though her voice lacked any conviction. But as we stood there, the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. It moved around us, circling and unseen. My heart pounded and Sarah gripped my hand. "We need to go," she said firmly, turning us toward the path home. As we hurried back, the woods seemed to close in around us, the trees casting long and sinister shadows. The rustling followed, always just out of sight. And then a low and guttural whisper seemed to echo through the trees, sending chills down my spine. Sarah quickened our pace, her usually reserved demeanor just giving way to a palpable fear. "Don't look back," she urged, her voice soft but urgent. "Just keep moving." We emerged from the woods and saw the streetlights glowing in the distance, the familiar sight of our town a relief. But the memory of those unseen eyes lingered, a haunting reminder of the darkness that lay just beyond our safe haven. As kids, we knew that it was not safe at night, but the real danger and when the specific time was still unknown. I wish that it had stayed that way. We made it to our homes as the streets were already silent and barren. We were safe, but we were late. We all got back to our respective homes just after 10 p.m. Our parents were worried and upset in equal measure. Despite the litany of promised punishments and concerns expressed by them, they were just glad that we had gotten back before it had gotten much later. My parents stood outside, their faces etched with worry and relief. "Where have you been?" my mother demanded, her voice sharp with fear. "We were worried sick." We got lost in the woods," I stammered out. My father's expression softened, but only slightly. "You know the rules. You need to be home before dark. Every night. This was far too close." I nodded my head and slumped my shoulders in defeat. He was right, but I still didn't know why. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only glimpsed the edge of something much larger, something that the town kept hidden. And I knew that I wasn't the only one who felt it. Sarah and Pete had saw it too. I was grounded, of course. I would not be playing with my friends anytime soon. I was a bit bummed out but also unnerved after my experience. I had stayed up later than normal reading some of my favorite comic books to get my mind off of it. But just then, I heard the strangest sound. It was a low and guttural hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. I looked out the window and that's when I saw it. The streets were empty, but there was a presence. It's hard to describe. It wasn't a person or an animal. it was something else, something that didn't feel like it belonged there. It moved with this strange and jerky motion, like it wasn't entirely in control of its own body. It radiated a disturbing sense of distortion that made my head hurt and my eyes had a difficult time focusing on it. I could feel this overwhelming sense of hunger that made my skin crawl. Before I knew it though, it was over. It had passed by my house and I realized that I had been staring out my window in a hypnotic daze. It was almost midnight and I went to sleep, and I didn't tell my parents about the disturbing thing that I had seen. The next morning, the memory of what I had seen lingered like a shadow in my mind, refusing to be shaken. I lied to myself, saying that it was all just a dream or a trick of the light, but the uneasy feeling in my gut told me otherwise. I went through the motions of my day trying to focus on schoolwork and chores, but my thoughts kept drifting back to that thing. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like a crack in the world that shouldn't exist. It wasn't until that evening, when the sun had started to dip below the horizon and cast the town in a pale twilight, that the phone rang. It startled me. I wasn't expecting anybody to call. My heart raced as I picked it up, hesitating for a moment before answering. "Hello?" I said, my voice a little bit shaky. "Hey." Sarah's voice came through the line, as calm as ever, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't miss. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Sarah, no, hi. What's up?" I tried to sound casual, but my mind was already racing. Why was she calling me? "Listen, I need to ask you something," she said, her tone shifting to something more serious. "Did you see anything strange last night? After what we already saw in the forest. Around the time of night that everyone is afraid of." I paused, my grip tightening on the phone. How did she know? "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to play it cool, but my voice betrayed me. "You must have." Pete's voice cut in. He was on the line as well, and his tone was unusually serious. "We know what we saw, and we think that you might have seen it too." "Pete's here with me," Sarah explained. We all saw something, didn't we?" I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "What are you talking about?" I tried again, but it was no use. They knew, somehow they knew. "Come on, don't make us spell it out," Pete said. "You must have seen it. You know it and we know it. So just be honest with us." I sighed, the weight of the secret passing down on me. "Fine," I admitted quietly. "I saw something. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't right. It moved weird and it felt off, like it didn't belong here." Sarah's breath hitched on the other end of the line. "That's exactly what we saw and felt. It's like it warped the air around it, didn't it? It made your head hurt just to look at it." "Yeah," I said, shivering at the memory. "Exactly. And this hunger, like it was starving for something." "Hunger," Pete repeated. "Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, it felt like it was starving. For what though? That's the question." "I've got no idea," I said. "But whatever it is, I don't think that it's good." The line suddenly went silent. Not the kind of silence where somebody's waiting for you to speak, but the kind that made you wonder if the connection was still alive. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat louder than the last, as I strained to hear anything. Breathing, movement, anything. and then suddenly the silence shattered. "Hey, kiddo." My mother's voice cut through the line, bright and cheerful, jarringly out of place. "Can you come downstairs for a second? Your dad and I need to talk to you about something." I blinked, my mind racing. How did she even know that I was on the phone? "Mom, I'm kind of in the middle of something," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can it wait?" "No, sweetie, it can't wait," she said, her tone shifting from cheerful to firm. "We need to talk to you now. And remember, you're not supposed to be talking to your friends right now. You know the rules." I groaned inwardly. Of course, now of all times, they decide to enforce the no phones rule while I was grounded. "But this is important," I protested, though I knew it was useless. "You don't understand." "We mean it." My dad's voice cut in, his deep tones flat and serious. "Now come downstairs." I could feel the weight of their gaze even through the phone, as if they could see me sitting there, clutching the receiver like it was a lifeline. "Fine," I muttered, though I knew that they couldn't hear me. "I'll be right there." I hung up the phone with a shaky hand, my mind racing. What were they going to say? Did they know about the calls, about what we had seen, and how had they even known that I was on the phone? I had been so careful, keeping the volume low, only talking when I was sure that they were distracted. But no, they always seemed to know. It was like they had a sixth sense for it, a radar that pinged whenever I tried to step even an inch out of line. I sighed, pushing myself up from the edge of my bed. My legs felt heavy, uncoordinated, as if the conversation had sapped all the strength from them. I made my way downstairs, each step creaking under my feet like a ticking clock. When I reached the bottom, my parents were already in the living room, seated on the couch with their backs straight up, their expressions unreadable. "Sit down, please," my mother said, her voice soft but commanding. I did, perching on the edge of the armchair across from them, my hands clasped tightly together in my lap. "What is this about?" I asked, trying to sound calm, though my voice trembled slightly. "We know that you've been talking to your friends again," my father said, his voice even but laced with an undercurrent of disappointment, despite what we had agreed. "It's not a big deal," I said, trying to brush it off. "We were just—" "It is a big deal," my mother cut in, her tone sharp. "We've talked about this. You cannot go running off with them out that late into the woods. It is not safe. You do not know how worried we were." I swallowed hard, the familiar knot of frustration tightening in my chest. "You don't understand," I said, the words spilling out before I could even stop them. "This is important. Something's wrong and we're trying to figure out what it is." My parents exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. For a moment, I thought that I saw a flicker of something, concern maybe, or doubt, but it was gone before I could be sure. "We've talked about this. There's nothing wrong. There will be nothing wrong as long as you just stay inside and do not go out at night. We need to be vigilant and keep everyone safe." I laughed, the sound bitter and sharp. "You think that I meant to get lost? It was a mistake. And how come you won't tell us why everybody in town just hunkers down and nobody is allowed out at night?" My dad just replied, "It's for your own good. You'll understand when you get older. We have to keep you safe. We have to keep everyone safe." I went back upstairs and set the phone that I was still holding down. I walked to the window, staring out into the dark. The streets were quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting, and next time it wouldn't just pass by. The night after that call, I found myself standing at my window again, staring out into the same darkness, half expecting to see it. But there was nothing, just the faint hum of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I told myself that it was only my imagination running wild, that we had all been spooked by something that could be explained away with science or logic. But the feeling lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. We didn't see it again, not directly, but the air in town felt heavier after that summer, as if something had shifted just beyond the edge of perception. People went about their lives, but there was a quiet unease, a shared glance exchanged when the streetlights flickered or the wind died down too suddenly. That was when our friend from school, Michael, went missing. It wasn't the first time that a kid had disappeared in our small town, but it was the first time that it felt different. Michael was the kind of boy who could vanish for days and turn up with a grin and a story about some wild adventure. But this time there was no story, only silence. His parents found his bike abandoned on the edge of the woods, the chain broken, the handlebars twisted at an odd angle. The police searched, but it was half-hearted. Anybody who was out for an entire night was never expected to come back. After that, the group of us, Sarah, Pete, and I, started to drift apart. We would meet up sometimes, sitting in the same spot by the river, where we used to talk about school and life and everything in between. But the conversation would inevitably circle back to Michael, to what we had seen that summer, to the unspoken fear that it had taken him. The laughter grew quieter, the silences longer. Eventually, we stopped meeting altogether, each of us retreating into our own lives, our own struggles. At some point, Sarah and Pete reunited and eventually got married. They still lived in town. It seemed like nobody ever left this place. Their home was just a few blocks away from mine, but I rarely spoke to them. It wasn't because I didn't want to, it was more than that. I felt like they had moved on without me, and I couldn't shake the feeling of jealousy since I had always harbored a secret crush on Sarah. I heard they moved into a house close by to take care of Sarah's mother, who was suffering from Alzheimer's and needed constant care. Sometimes while out walking, I would see them with her on the sidewalk, but I was too embarrassed to say hello. For my part, even though I felt guilty for trying to forget our friendship, I couldn't forget what we saw. I couldn't stop looking. Every night I would stand at my window, scanning the street, the yard, the stretch of woods beyond the houses. I told myself it was just a habit, just paranoia, but deep down I knew better. I was waiting for it to come back, to see if it would show itself again, and when it didn't, I couldn't decide if I was relieved or disappointed. Years went by and the memory of that summer faded into the kind of half-remembered terror that feels more like a dream than reality. But on quiet nights when the house was still and the world felt too large, I would catch myself standing at the window again, searching the darkness for something that didn't belong. And sometimes in the flicker of a shadow or the bend of a tree limb, I could swear that I saw it, just for a moment, just out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing ever there. Or so I told myself. The truth was, I had seen it again, more than once, always in the periphery, always gone when I turned to look. It was a trick of the light, I had said, a trick of the mind. But the hunger, the same gnawing hunger, lingered in the air, sharp and relentless, and I couldn't help but wonder, had it ever really left? Or had it just been waiting, biding its time, until the moment was right? We all know it exists, but we pretend like it doesn't. We try to act as if we have a strict curfew and that there's nothing lurking outside. But those who are too brave or naive, thinking that it's all just a big joke, they don't last very long. They always end up being taken away, just like those who fall victim by accident. I couldn't help but wonder which one Michael was. Those of us who are still here know that whatever that thing is, it's out there, stalking and hunting, looking for anything, an open window, a cracked door. Disappearances are still frequent, especially for such a small town. The police have a whole song and dance for anybody who goes missing from the outside. But when it is a resident, well, it's more of a case where the families of the victims are reprimanded for not having known better. No one knows why the window of time is so mercifully brief. Almost just as suddenly as it starts, it's over. By 11:50 p.m., the streets are quiet again and the town feels normal. But it's not normal, it never was. People here have learned to live with it. They lock their doors and shut their windows and pretend that it's not happening. When I was a bit older and I knew more, I asked my parents why we didn't just move, but they never gave me a good answer. All they said was, it wouldn't do any good. It has to be here. It is safer for everyone if it's here. It didn't make sense. I know that people can get attached to places, but it felt crazy to me. I couldn't just pretend that this was all normal. Not after what I saw. Not after what I felt. There was something out there, and it's worse than anyone would believe. And then after years of waiting, I finally saw it again. It was a normal night, at least as normal as nights could be in my town. I was getting ready to go to bed when I noticed that my cat Quincy was outside. He had gotten out when I had come home earlier and was sauntering along the sidewalk outside. The time was 11:36 p.m. I had no idea if this creature did anything to animals, but I did not want to find out. I had never let Quincy outside before, and when he did not come back to my shouted calls for his return, I had to do something dangerous and stupid to save him. And so I rushed outside to save him. I raced out to grab my cat, and I froze when I sensed a presence as I was scrambling back to my door. Quincy's ears folded back and he hissed. I felt paralyzed, and then I thought that I saw it again. It was different this time, larger and more overwhelming than before. Its presence seemed to fill the entire street, pressing against the houses like an unseen force. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't work. I was frozen in place, my breath caught in my throat. To my horror, it seemed to finally regard me. Quincy jumped out of my hands and ran back to my house. He had fortunately evaded whatever interest the thing might have had with him. The creature's head twisted unnaturally in my direction, its distorted features coalescing into more recognizable shapes. Staring into the grotesque visage forced a scream out of me as I beheld the blasphemous impossibility. I turned and sprinted away, screaming like a maniac, my heart hammering against my ribcage with such force that each beat felt like it might crack my chest open. The sound of its pursuit echoed behind me, a wet slapping noise like a monstrous jellyfish gliding across the ground. Its deafening roar filled the air, shaking the ground beneath my feet as I ran for my life. I did not know if I could get away. No one that I knew had been outside and survived. I ducked into an alley, my hands shaking as I pressed myself against the wall. My breath came in short and sharp inhales, and I could feel sweat dripping down my face. I didn't dare look around the corner. I didn't dare move. And then I heard a familiar voice crying out, "Mom, please, come back inside. We need to go now." The harrowing screams that came next sliced through the air, piercing and full of terror. My heart raced as I strained to see who was making them, but all I could make out were shadowy figures caught in the open. The screams were short, sharp, and then they were swallowed by the night. The deafening silence that followed only added to the fear weighing down on me. I stayed pressed against the wall, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The darkness seemed to come alive with every creak and rustle, amplifying my fear. I held my breath until I heard the sound of the creature moving away, and then just like that, it was gone. But the eerie stillness lingered, haunting me even after the clock struck 11:50 p.m. The streets were once again quiet, but my nerves were still on edge. I stumbled back to my house, every step feeling like a race against time. Quincy waited anxiously at the door and bolted inside with me, seeking shelter inside. The horrible night had left me shaken but grateful to be alive. Whatever that thing is, it does not belong in this world. It is not of this time or place, and its presence is so unsettling, it makes your mind ache just to catch a glimpse of it. No one can tell of its origins. Maybe they are lost in the depths of history. But whatever its history, it remains. Always there, lurking in the shadows every night without fail. The encounter had left me shaken, but I wasn't ready for the truth that would be revealed. The screams that I heard that night and my miraculous survival suddenly made sense when I discovered who the real victims were. The realization hit me like a hammer to the chest. Peter and Sarah Morris, along with Eleanor Smith, were missing. The names echoed in my mind, refusing to settle. Pete and Sarah had been out there that night. The chilling cry from a woman's voice, Sarah calling out to her mother, who had wandered out of their home at the fateful moment. I couldn't breathe. The air seemed thick and pressing against my lungs as if the darkness itself had taken on a physical form. Quincy, sensing my distress, stayed close, his eyes watchful and uneasy, but even his presence couldn't comfort me. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I stepped outside. The air was colder now, biting at my skin. The streets were already empty again, but the shadows seemed to move on their own accord, twisting into shapes that made my blood run cold. I walked without a destination, my feet carrying me on autopilot while my mind raced. How could this be happening? How could they be gone now? They were supposed to be okay. We were supposed to be okay. The thought sent a chill down my spine. Whatever that thing was, it had taken them, and it had left me alive. Why? The questions swirled in my head like a storm, each one sharper and more terrifying than the last. I found myself at the edge of the town square, staring at the old oak tree where we had held so many gatherings. Its branches creaked in the wind, a mournful sound that seemed to whisper their names. Pete, Sarah, how could this have happened to you? I walked numbly back home, almost heedless of the encroaching hour. I stepped back inside and Quincy meowed softly, nudging my hand with his muzzle. I couldn't process everything that had happened. The creature wasn't just some mindless beast, it was calculated. I realized that I might be the only one who had seen it and lived to tell the tale. At that point, I did the one thing you probably think that everybody should have done by now. I left my hometown. I moved to the largest city that I could reach to get away from it all. My parents didn't approve, in fact, they tried to tell me that I couldn't go. I was so desperate to get out of there that I had to sneak away in the early morning, when they couldn't interfere. I never understood why we all stayed there and tried to ignore the eldritch nightmare that hunted us at night. It seemed so simple and I felt better at first. The city felt alive with the hum of traffic and the distant chatter of people during the day, a cacophony that made me feel safe, anonymous. Indeed, I thought that I had left the nightmare behind, that the creature was just a memory, a relic of a past that I could bury. My new apartment is a cozy studio on the 5th floor with a view of the bustling streets below, high enough where looking out the window does not fill me with dread at night. But unfortunately, something happened last night that has shattered the fragile illusion of my peaceful transition. On the first night in my new place, I sat on the edge of my bed, flipping through a magazine to distract myself from the creeping unease that had settled into the pit of my stomach. The clock on the nightstand read 11:28 p.m. I told myself that I was being paranoid, that the creature was gone, that I was safe now. But the weight of the past lingered, a shadow in the corner of my mind that I couldn't shake. By 11:38 p.m., the city outside my window was eerily quiet. The usual sounds of traffic and distant music had faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I tried to focus on the magazine, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, the darkness beyond the glass pressing in on me. And then I heard it, a soft, tentative tap against the pane. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the magazine slipping from my fingers and falling to the floor. The sound was light, almost imperceptible, but it sent a chill coursing through my veins. I told myself it was just a stray branch, a bird, anything but what I feared. But then it came again, another tap, this time more insistent. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. My eyes were fixed on the window, the darkness beyond it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. The tapping stopped, and for a moment there was nothing but silence, and then a faint scratching sound like claws on glass. My heart sank. I knew that sound, and I knew what it meant. Slowly, with my legs trembling beneath me, I rose from the bed and approached the window. My hand reached for the curtain, hesitated, and then, with a deep and shaky breath, I pulled it back. What I saw made me freeze in terror. The creature was perched on the fire escape outside my window, its twisted form silhouetted against the moonlit sky. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence seemed to fill the room, pressing in on me with an unspeakable horror. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. The creature's head tilted to the side, its gaze locked on mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. It was here. It had followed me. And then, as if in slow motion, its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged teeth, and it let out a low and guttural growl. The sound shattered the paralysis that held me in place. I stumbled back, my voice finally breaking free in a raw and terrified scream. The creature's form seemed to blur and shift, its presence filling the room with an unspeakable darkness. And then everything went black. I regained consciousness, and I know that it's not over. There's no escape from this thing that has followed me. I consider what my parents had said when I asked them why we never moved. And then, with dawning horror, I realized the truth of their words. It is safer for everyone if it's here. And they didn't mean that it was safer for us. They meant it was safer for everyone else. They knew the danger and they stayed to keep it there. And now in my ignorance, I have made a huge mistake. Somehow it knew that I left. It has followed me here to a place where over 1 million people will soon know about its existence, and maybe more if it moves beyond that. My hands tremble as I write this, the weight of my mistake crushing me. The city outside my window is still quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and wrong. The clock on the nightstand reads 12:02 a.m. Less than an hour has passed since I saw it, since it found me. I can feel its presence, a cold, oppressive shadow lingering just beyond the edge of perception. In my irrational terror, I tried to barricade myself inside, shoving furniture against the door, but it feels useless. It got in before and it can get in again. My mind races trying to think of what to do next, but every thought is clouded by fear. I keep telling myself to stay calm, to think clearly, but the terror clawing at my chest makes it impossible. Even though I know it won't come for me until tomorrow, I can't shake the feeling that it's already here, lurking and watching my every move. Memories of past encounters with this entity flood my mind, causing an overwhelming sense of fear and unease. I try to rationalize and convince myself that I'm safe for now, but deep down I know it's only a matter of time before it comes for me once again. The apartment feels smaller now, the walls closing in on me. I've turned on every light hoping to chase away the darkness, but the shadows cast by the lamps seem to twist and writhe on the walls. I've tried calling for help, but my phone has no signal as if something has severed the connection to the outside world. I pace back and forth, my eyes darting toward the window, half expecting to see it perched there again. The fire escape creaks faintly and I freeze, my breath catching in my throat. It's just the wind, I tell myself, but the words ring hollow. I stop in front of the mirror above the dresser and stare at my reflection. My face is pale, my eyes wide and haunted. I look like a stranger, someone that I don't recognize. The person staring back at me is fractured, broken by the realization of what I've unleashed. I'm so sorry, this is my fault. I brought it here, I didn't know. Sarah, Pete, forgive me. Please, for your own safety, stay inside between 11:38 p.m. and 11:50 p.m. By now, it might not be safe wherever you are as well. Damon McCory, Rain, Meat Gasher, Die Screaming, Smiling Cat, Nelson Asada, Dalo Magora, Caden Gibbler, Jerry Ramey, Big Country Allen, Malcolm Black, Justin Fultonauer,